"Come on, Kevin," shouted Tony. "Just jump over it." I looked at the oscillating sprinkler. My best friend, Tony, and our other neighbour, Dave, stood on the far side of the sprinkler, big grins on their faces, their shorts a damp testament to their bravery. At the ripe old age of almost 9, I knew that I had to overcome my reluctance to try something new. And this wasn't just jumping over a sprinkler. They had the hose at the end and were wriggling it, moving it, so that it wasn't a stationary target. Most of the time, I failed at whatever my buddies came up with. But this was not jumping over the sprinkler, moving or not, and I knew that if I didn't pass this test, it was going to be a long, lonely summer. Just then, Tony's little sister burst from the house in her bright pink and orange sunsuit, and without hesitation ran directly in front of me and did a little hop over the sprinkler and took her place beside my friends, her grin mirroring the others. Great. Shown up by a little girl. Tony had stopped moving it when his sister showed up, but she didn't know that. The idea here is to time the movement of the sprinkler and watch carefully to see which way the hose was moving with your jump. I'm not very good at timing, but chant it to myself. It's just water. It's just water. Closing my eyes, I charged at the sprinkler, just as it turned its rays of water in my direction, surprising me. I gasped in reaction to the frigid water and instantly choked as water filled my mouth and sprayed up my nose. I opened my eyes just in time to avoid tripping over the sprinkler, made an uncoordinated jump, and then ran over to where my friend stood. Well, I'd done it. They exchanged a look. Not just any look. That look. The one that says, "See, you can't even jump over a sprinkler without being a moron." Just ignore them, I said to myself. I forced a smile and said, "Let's do it again." And this time, I managed to time it just right. More by accident than anything else, and my moment of failure was over. Tony and Dave made up my world. We were like the Three Musketeers, and I liked the feeling of belonging. We chased each other around the yard, jumping through the sprinkler, slipping on the wet grass, and loving every second of our first day of summer vacation. Once school lets out, summer stretched before us like a highway to anywhere. It didn't matter where we would go. All that mattered was that we were on it and headed somewhere. Everett, Massachusetts, has amazing summers. The sky's brilliant blue, peeking through the deep green of the huge old elm trees that grew tall, dark, and black, silhouetted against the sunlit sky. We had stopped frolicking in the water and were on our backs underneath the great trees in Tony's yard. The back screen door of the Capitini's house screeched open, and Miss Capitini called, "Kevin, your mother didn't know you were here." At that, Tony and Dave pushed themselves up onto their elbows, exchanged another look, and immediately started mimicking what my mother might have said on the phone, using high-pitched voices. "Oh, Kevin, be careful crossing the street. Do you want me to walk you to Tony's house? It's pretty far to go on your own. Want me to hold your hand, Kevy?" I glared at them, standing up for myself. I've been crossing the street by myself for years. This much was true, and until I was 7 or 8, it was usually when old Mr. Birch was standing there in his orange vest and handheld stop sign, doing his volunteer work as the traffic guard for the elementary school kids crossing Dartmouth Street. My mother would let me cross alone while she watched from the window, knowing that Mr. Birch, who I got to know in the first grade, was there to stop any of the infrequent traffic if necessary. Mom said it's okay for you to stay for lunch. Miss Capitini's voice could be heard throughout the neighborhood, and I winced at the volume. Now the whole neighborhood would know what exactly I was doing. Oh, Kevy's staying for lunch, taunted Dave. I wanted to sock him right in the nose, but he was pretty big for his age. Instead, I reached down and with my hand tossed a handful of water from the grass up into the air, and before another taunt could be launched, another game had started. We make up games all the time, inventing rules as necessary. This time, Tony and Dave decided that if you hit someone in the face with a handful of water, you get a point. What they didn't really do was decide if we were teams or if we were playing every man for himself. Tony's little sister tired of the game and went inside, leaving me the sole target for both boys. Fortunately, because I'm so small, I'm also quick. So it took a while for both Tony and Dave to get enough points to win. 21. We always played games until we reached the goal of 21. It's like some kind of magic number. Fortunately, Tony and Dave were arguing about who won first. This time, their hostility was directed at each other rather than at me, and I was sat panting in the sun, enjoying my moment of peace. Hey guys, let's play Follow the Leader. You have to do what I do. With that bold announcement, bold for me anyway, I started hopping like I was in a sack race and hopped over the sprinkler. Competition is the name of game for my friends and me. The fight forgotten, Tony and Dave obediently hopped through the sprinkler. Then, because I didn't have any better ideas, said, Okay, Tony, you be the leader. And off it went from there. I managed to avoid being the leader for more than a couple of times, and because my two friends had such a drive to compete, they didn't really notice. Mission accomplished. I learned that by blending into the background, I was able to enjoy playing with my friends without too much notice being taken of me. And when they didn't notice me, we got along pretty well. It was when the spotlight was on me that something happened that managed to make me feel uncomfortable. Hey Dave, can you do this? Tony launched himself onto his hands and walked a couple of steps on his hands. Sure I can. Dave managed to overshoot his bounds and landed up on his back. Tony and I burst out laughing. Dave wasn't usually the butt of the joke, so to me, this was especially funny. He rolled over, hopped to his feet, muttering, I'll show you. Again, and again, and yet again. Dave failed every time. Each time I heard him land on his back, a puff of air forced out of his chest cavity with an audible grunt. I winced. I knew I wasn't going to like what happened next. I also had no way to stop it. Dave faced me and challenged. You do it then, smart ass. I gulped. My heart dropped like a stone and my stomach contracting in fear. Yeah, Kev, show us how it's done. You chicken. Fraidy cat. Using the emotional momentum from having enjoyed the past hour and a half with my friends, I threw myself forward as I'd seen Tony do. And just like Dave, I overshot my mark and landed hard on my back. Only I didn't land on the grass. The strange crunching sound coincided with the pain in my back and the water that seemed to be coming from every direction. I couldn't breathe. My eyes closed, protecting them from the spray of water made my imagination go into overdrive. Maybe I'd broken my back. What if I could never walk again? I half expected Tony to come over and help me up. Instead, I heard a howl of anger and then felt the sprinkler being jerked out from underneath me. Kevin, you dork, you broke it. Now what are we going to do? You're such a loser. I peeked out through one eye and saw Tony and Dave trying to readjust the sprinkler. But with the huge fountain of water coming from the edge where the hose connected, told me that I'd broken the connection. Dave tried to yank the mess out of Tony's hands, and Tony kept turning around, keeping his back to Dave as he tried to block the water enough to see the damage. "Let me see," Dave demanded, grabbing the far edge with the sprinkler. "No!" Tony shouted. A peculiar tug of war commenced between the two boys. I could have predicted what happened next. With another sound of destruction, Dave landed on his backside with the now empty sprinkler in his hands, and Tony danced away, using his thumb to spray Dave and me. We were both still lying on the grass. I was still trying to figure out if my back was broken, but no one paid me any attention. I rolled over onto my front and gingerly pushed myself up to a standing position. By now, Tony and Dave were right up against the house, and Miss Capitini's entrance onto the scene was announced by the screech of the back door. In his frenzy, Tony didn't hear it, and he swung around, the spray of the hose following him. It all seemed to happen in slow motion. 1 second he was whooping and hollering. The next second, the full force of the water coming from the hose was trained on Mrs. Capitini, and he drenched his mother from head to toe. All sounds of laughter and gaiety had stopped. Dripping and as angry as I have ever seen her, Miss Capitini flew down the steps, marched over to the faucet, and with a vicious twist, turned off the water. No more water today. None of us dared to challenge that statement. I figured that Tony was lucky she didn't haul off and smack him. If it had been his dad, things would have turned physical and ugly in seconds. Silence fell over the yard as we watched Tony's mum march back up the steps to his house. After the next screech of the screen door closing behind Miss Capitini's indignant back, we all exchanged wide-eyed looks. But that didn't last for long. Once Miss Capitini was out of sight, Dave ran over and grabbed the hose out of Tony's hands. He laughed and taunted Tony as he pranced just out of Tony's reach. An empty hose didn't seem like much of a game to me, but Dave had other ideas. "Watch this! Hey, look out!" This from Tony as he danced back away from Dave, who was twirling around and around, the hose extending out from his hands at waist level. Tony wasn't quick enough. Smack! The sound of the hose hitting Tony's stomach sickened me. Dave froze. If it had happened to me, Tony and Dave would have just ganged up on me and laughed. But this time, Dave hit Tony. Tony's eyes blazed. He leaped to his feet and charged at Dave. Dave dropped the hose and ran. Within seconds, Tony caught up to Dave and with a closed fist, smacked him high on his shoulder. I could see Dave's skin first turn white at the sight of the impact, then an angry red. The red blotch stood out against Dave's white skin like an ink stain. All this time, I stood, rooted in place. Tony looked in my direction, and when our eyes met, I could see he was still really angry. Somehow I didn't know what to do. Apologize? But it wasn't my fault. He turned away from Dave and picked up the hose. This time, when he started swinging it, he raised it high over his head. "Hey, look at me, I'm a cowboy." For a second, I watched it, wishing I could be doing that. Just go from a moment of anger to the next, a moment of joy. Then Tony's eyes fell on me again. Kevin's one of my cattle. I'm going to rope him." With that, Tony let loose of the hose, and the hard end of the hose hit my jaw. There had been no time to react. The force of the blow knocked me from my feet. I sat there stunned, holding my hand to my jaw. "You're gonna cry?" Go ahead and cry. Be a crybaby. Taunting voices echoed in my ears as I got to my feet once more. Only this time I didn't have any ideas. The atmosphere in Tony's backyard had turned dark and ugly. I wanted like anything to keep playing with Tony, but I didn't like being the brunt end of their jokes. I didn't like being hurt. The games they played always seemed to hurt someone, often me, but their jeering voices still echoing in my ears. I half ran from Tony's backyard to the sidewalk out front. Were they following me? Part of me hoped they were. What I really wanted was for them to beg me to come back. I waited for another moment. My best friend, for as long as I could remember, had hurt me, and then laughed about it. So far, neither boy had showed any sign of coming after me. I could hear their shouts from the backyard. Apparently, a new game had begun, without me. Holding back the hot tears of humiliation and betrayal, I started the lonely journey home. One house, two houses, the school. As I trudged up the street, I looked at Dartmouth Elementary School directly across the street from my house, looking sad, lonely, and empty. Just how I felt. Its windows stared blankly at me as I plodded home. I'd made a jeering face at the school when I'd set out this morning, crossing the street and heading to Tony's house, without Mum knowing. Although she always knew where I was. Where else would I even go? This morning seemed so far away now, and I didn't feel nearly as confident as I had then. I didn't like the twisted feeling, sick feeling on my stomach. I rubbed both my jaw and my stomach. Maybe I deserved this feeling. I had decided to go to Tony's house without permission. I had crossed the street alone. Maybe this is what I get for being so sneaky. Now I kind of wished I could go to school today. At least at school I had someone to play with. It was usually Tony, but at school he was nicer than he had been today. We were friends. Best friends. We'd been friends since, well, before I could even remember. I knew that. I also knew that Tony only shows off when he's trying to impress Dave. I just wished he hadn't laughed so hard when the hose hit me. I could still hear the loud smack right next to my ear as it collided with my jaw. As I had done just a couple hours before when I started out for Tony's house. I looked both ways before crossing Dartmouth Street, there in front of my house, then climbed the 2 steps up to front porch and went inside. Kevin, what are you doing home so soon? My mum looked up from her ironing in surprise. I mumbled something about watching television. No, she said. You don't want to watch television now. It's a beautiful day outside. Enjoy the sunshine and fresh air while you still can. Mum hadn't even looked at me after a quick glance of surprise as I dragged my feet through the front door. I flopped into my dad's chair. Tony hit me with the hose. Oh. Mums are good at injecting a lot of meaning into a single word. She kept ironing, but I sensed that she was listening a little bit more carefully now. Dave hit Tony at first, so Tony punched him. Then Tony started swinging the hose like some kind of cowboy or something, and it hit me right here. I pointed to the now swollen part of my jaw. I pushed on it to make it hurt again. I needed her to listen to me, to believe me. I needed her to help me figure out why my best friend had just hurt me. Honey, you know that boys will be boys. I'm sure he didn't mean it. She hung up Dad's shirt. She had just finished ironing, reached into the laundry basket, and shook out the next one and started ironing again, without so much as a glance at me. You'll see tomorrow. You will just all forget about it and be good friends again. As much as I wanted to believe her, the ache in my stomach didn't think so. I brought my knees up to my chest, snuggled down deeper into Dad's chair, wishing it was Saturday. If it was Saturday, we would both sit in this chair and watch Creature double feature, as was our habit. Summer started looking a little long. The next morning, my mum poked her head around the door just as I woke up. Wake up, sleepyhead. Tony's mom is taking you two to the beach today, so get up and get ready. It didn't take me but a couple of seconds to process what she said. The beach! It wasn't so much it was a bus ride that excited me, but the fact that our destination was the beach. Summer days languished, a great yellow-white void where the minutes turn into hours, unless something exciting happens, like going to the beach. Tony's mum was taking us. She and my mum would take turns going to either the beach or to the pool. The beach was my favourite place. Dave never came. He could only go to the pool. 10 cents was the price of freedom. 10 cents and the 25 minutes it took to get there. 25 minutes where I sat with my face glued to the window, desperate to catch my first glimpse of the ocean and to keep myself from getting carsick. If yes, you can get carsick in a bus. There it was. I lifted my face and sniffed. I could always smell it before I saw it. There was no mistaking the sea salted air, the way my skin felt moist, but not wet. The next turn and the diamond glitters made me squint and turn my head away, just long enough to adjust to the dancing, scattered sunlight. Tony and I were both bouncing on the balls of our feet in impatience, hoisting ourselves down the aisle, one hand on a seatbelt on each side as we waited our turn to get off the bus. We had our towels and sandals. Who needed their beach chair? We had no intention of spending any time on the beach. Finally, a break on the wall of people, our heads barely above their waist, and the second Tony saw an opening, he bolted. I was right on his heels. Shouting like warriors, we tossed our sandals and towels in a heap just before the wet edge of the sand. Not stopping, we ploughed into the water, gasping at its chill. But neither of one of us would show weakness to the other. If he could stand the freezing water, so could I. This was the one time I was Tony's equal, and one thing I could do was swim like a fish. Whooping and splashing, we fought the tug of the undertow, trying to run underwater, and looking silly for it. You look like you're running in slow motion. I tried harder. I always did around Tony. As I pushed through the water, I lost footing and fell face first into the water and emerged gasping. When I broke surface, Tony was laughing at me, like he always did. But I didn't let it bug me this time. It was just the two of us in the water, and he always knew his dominance over me. When no one else was around, he had little to prove. He dunked my head under the water a time or two, just to make sure I knew. I knew. This too was the price to pay to go to the beach. Most of the time, I felt like we were friends when we were at the beach. Quick sprint up the boardwalk for a corn dog or a coke that we wolfed down so that by the time we reached the water again, we splashed right back in. That night, I went to bed without a bath. I wanted to smell the sea in my hair, feel the grit of the sand in my sheets. I wanted to feel alive and equal and wanted. And that wraps up chapter 2 of Always Pick Last by Kevin Kearns.